The last thing Marcus Chen saw before the water turned to liquid fire was a rancher's boot blocking the stone steps, and above that, a smile. This is the story of how 11 strangers followed a photocopied map to what they believed was healing water, and instead found a meticulously engineered death trap in the Nevada high desert. Before we descend into this dark chapter of American frontier justice, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if stories like this fascinate you, hit that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear has been buried in county records and ranch family silence for nearly 50 years. The Colton Ranch sat 37 miles northeast of Tonopah, Nevada, where the land looked like God had given up halfway through creation. Sagebrush, volcanic rock, dirt the color of dried blood. The property sprawled across 800 acres of what real estate agents would generously call high desert scrubland, worth almost nothing except for one geological accident, a natural hot spring that bubbled up at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, scalding enough to melt the January ice that killed weaker ranchers' cattle. The Coltons' 3 brothers and their aging father had owned the land since 1949, running a marginal operation of Herefords and bitterness. They'd piped the spring water into a concrete stock tank, letting it cool just enough to keep their animals alive through winters when the temperature dropped to 10 below. The spring itself sat in a natural depression ringed by cottonwood trees, steam rising like spirits at dawn, the water so mineral-rich it stained the rocks orange and white in Baroque patterns that looked almost deliberate. Then came the 1970s, and with them, the seekers. Back to the land magazines, Mother Earth News, the Whole Earth Catalog, publications that promised urban refugees they could find authenticity in geodesic domes and organic gardens, began running coded articles about healing springs on public land throughout the West. One piece in the spring of 1973 described an unnamed Nevada location. Clothing optional, no fees, mineral waters that can cure everything from arthritis to spiritual malaise. The directions were deliberately vague, but persistent readers could triangulate the coordinates. The article failed to mention that the spring sat squarely on private property, surrounded by 5 strands of barbed wire and no trespassing signs the Coltons had posted every quarter mile. The first van arrived on a Tuesday in June of 1974. Leonard Colton, the eldest brother, found it parked on the access road, sliding door open, revealing tie-dyed curtains and the sweet-sour smell of marijuana. 3 people, 2 men with hair past their shoulders, 1 woman in a macrame halter top, had cut through his fence with bolt cutters and were soaking naked in his stock tank, passing a joint, laughing about finding paradise. Leonard called the sheriff from the ranch house phone. Its cord stretched taut with his anger. Deputy Martin Russo arrived 2 hours later, by which time the hippies had dressed and were loading up, promising they didn't mean any harm, man. Russo took their names, issued no citations, and told Leonard to chill out. It's just kids. They're harmless. Harmless. Over the next 18 months, the trespassing became routine. Every full moon seemed to summon them vans with California plates, hand-painted school buses, once even a converted bread truck with love spray-painted across the side. They'd cut the fence, soak in the spring overnight, leave behind trash and human waste and the particular contempt of people who believed private property was a capitalist fiction. The Coltons repaired the fence 11 times, called the sheriff 23 times. Were told 23 times that it wasn't worth the paperwork. In August of 1975, they found a dead calf in the spring. The animal, a 3-month-old heifer worth $600, had somehow wandered through a gap the trespassers had left in the fence and drowned in water too hot for its body to tolerate. Its bloated corpse floated in the steam, eyes white and cooked. The loss wasn't just financial. In a marginal operation where every calf represented the difference between profit and bankruptcy, one dead animal was a season's margin erased. When Leonard called Russo this time, His voice carried a quality the deputy had never heard before, something flat and final, like a door closing. "We'll handle it ourselves," Leonard said, and hung up. What the sheriff didn't know, what wouldn't become clear until much later, was that handling it had started weeks earlier. The three Colton brothers and their father had begun meeting after dinner, spreading topographical maps across the kitchen table, sketching plans with the careful attention of men who'd spent their lives working with water, gravity, and the stubbornness of Earth. They studied the spring's geology, where the hottest water emerged, where the cold creek fed in, how to redirect flow, how to create something that looked natural but functioned as a trap. By September, they'd hired day laborers from Tonopah men who asked no questions for cash to help dig out a larger soaking area. They lined it with railroad ties, making it look rustic and inviting, easily fitting 20 people. They installed a gate at the stone steps, hidden underwater, designed to slide across and lock from the outside. Most crucially, they rerouted the spring's hottest vein directly into the new pool and blocked the Cold Creek inlet with a valve they could control from a concealed position in the rocks. The trap was set. All they needed was bait. On September 15th, 1975, a hand-drawn map appeared on the bulletin board at the High Desert Co-op in Reno. It showed a route to the most incredible hot spring in Nevada, promised free baths and friendly locals, and marked the full moon on September 21st as the best night to visit. The drawing was crude, but accurate enough to lead someone directly to the Colton Ranch. The map was signed, "A Friend." Would you have trusted it? That promise of free healing water under a desert moon? Or would something in the perfection of the invitation, the exact directions, the enthusiastic welcome have felt like teeth beneath a smile? 11 people decided to trust it, loading into 3 vehicles on the night of September 21st, following those photocopied directions toward water and death. But they weren't the first to arrive that night. The Coltons had been waiting since sunset, and they'd brought tiki torches. The first van crested the ridge at 10:47 p.m., headlights cutting through darkness thick as motor oil, and what its passengers saw looked like a desert oasis conjured from a counterculture fever dream. Tiki torches ringed the enlarged pool, their flames dancing in the night wind, casting orange light across rising steam that glowed like something holy. The lead vehicle belonged to Marcus Chen and his girlfriend, Sarah Dietrich, both 24, both graduate students at UC Berkeley studying environmental science. They'd found the map at the co-op during a road trip through Nevada, researching geothermal activity for Sarah's thesis. Behind them came a converted school bus painted with mushrooms and peace signs, carrying 6 people from a commune. Outside Eugene, the oldest was 32, the youngest barely 19. The third vehicle, a Ford Econoline with a cracked windshield, held 3 friends from Sacramento who'd been following the hot spring circuit all summer, collecting experiences like other people collected postcards. 11 strangers, united by a shared belief that the earth offered free healing to those willing to seek it. Marcus parked and stepped out into air that smelled of juniper smoke and sulfur. The temperature had dropped to 43 degrees, cold enough to make the steam look supernatural, warm enough that the promise of hot water felt like salvation. He could hear the spring before he saw it, a low burble and hiss, water moving over stone, the particular music of geothermal activity. Sarah grabbed their towels and a bottle of wine they'd planned to share under the stars. "This is perfect," she whispered, squeezing his hand. A figure emerged from behind the torches, Leonard Colton, wearing a denim jacket and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His brothers, Dale and Raymond, flanked him at a careful distance, holding beers with the casual posture of men at a barbecue, not an ambush. Their father, Walter, sat in a folding chair near the rocks, face hidden in shadow. "Welcome, friends," Leonard called out, voice carrying genuine warmth that years of practice had perfected. "Glad you found the place. We don't get many visitors, but when the moon's right, we like to share what the earth's given us." The Eugene commune spilled out of their bus, already shedding clothes with the unself-conscious ease of people who'd rejected shame along with conventional society. Marcus noticed the pool looked different from the stock tank description in the magazine. Larger, deeper, lined with railroad ties that gave it a rustic charm. Stone steps descended into water so clear he could see the bottom, approximately 8 feet down, the minerals creating swirling patterns of white and orange sediment. "We expanded it," Leonard explained, tracking Marcus's gaze. "Figured if word was getting out anyway, might as well make it comfortable. Cold Creek feeds in from the north, Hot Spring from the south. You can find your perfect temperature just by moving around." A lie, delivered with the confidence of truth. Raymond Colton distributed towels, actual clean towels, not the ratty things you'd expect from hardscrabble ranchers. Dale offered cold beers from a cooler packed with ice. The hospitality felt genuine enough that Sarah's initial wariness evaporated. She'd expected locals to mean hostile, probably armed, definitely unwelcoming. Instead, these men seemed almost grateful for company, eager to play host to travelers seeking what they'd been seeking themselves: connection, authenticity, a break from the machinery of modern life, free healing water, and friendly locals. By 11:15 p.m., 8 of the 11 visitors were in the pool, bodies pink from heat, voices rising in laughter and conversation. The water temperature felt perfect, hot enough to loosen muscles, cool enough to stay submerged. Marcus floated on his back, watching stars through the steam, thinking about how Sarah would describe this in her thesis. The Eugene crew had started singing, some folk song about rivers and freedom, their voices echoing off the rocks. The 3 Sacramento friends hesitated at the pool's edge. Something about the setup bothered Jake Morrison, though he couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was how the Coltons had positioned themselves, not joining the soak, but standing watch at precise intervals around the pool's perimeter. Maybe it was the way the tiki torches made it impossible to see past their circle of light into the surrounding darkness. Maybe it was the absence of any sound except human voices. No coyotes, no insects. Nothing wild acknowledging the presence of this gathering. "You coming in?" his friend Anna called, treading water near the center. Jake's hand touched the stone steps. The water felt incredible against his fingertips, silky with minerals, the perfect temperature for a cold Nevada night. He descended 1 step, then another. The heat enveloped his calves, his thighs, his waist. That's when Leonard Colton checked his watch, a deliberate gesture, casual as lighting a cigarette, and nodded to his brothers. Dale moved first, crouching near the rocks where the Cold Creek inlet pipe emerged. His hand found the valve they'd installed 3 weeks earlier, hidden beneath a decorative arrangement of stones. He turned it clockwise, slowly, the sound lost beneath the singing and splashing. The cold water stopped flowing. Every degree of cooling it had provided to the pool, approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit, vanished from the equation. Raymond walked to the stone steps where Jake was still entering, one hand trailing on the railroad ties for balance. He made a show of adjusting a torch, but his boot found the hidden lever. He pressed down. Underwater, a gate fabricated from half-inch steel plate began sliding across the steps, smooth and silent, on tracks the day laborers had installed. It locked into place with a soft click that no one heard. The pool, which moments earlier had been an open invitation, became a closed system. Walter Colton stood from his folding chair and walked to a different valve, this one controlling the spring's hottest vein, the water that emerged at 140 degrees before any mixing occurred. His arthritic fingers gripped the wheel. He'd spent 71 years on this land, raised 3 sons here, buried his wife beneath a cottonwood tree, 50 yards from where strangers now soaked naked in water he'd been managing since before they were born. "For the calf," he whispered, and opened the valve completely. In the pool, Marcus noticed the temperature shift. Before anyone else, a degree, maybe 2, nothing alarming. Hot springs fluctuated naturally. But then Sarah grabbed his arm, her face suddenly tight with concern. "It's getting hotter," she said. Fast. How long does it take to realize that welcome was misdirection, that hospitality was theater, that the water you trusted was turning into an instrument specifically designed to kill you. The Eugene commune stopped singing. Sarah Dietrich's hand broke the surface at 11:29 p.m., steam scalding her palm, and in that moment she understood they'd been invited to their own execution. The difference between comfort and catastrophe in water is approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit, the space between a soak and a simmer, and that distance was collapsing by the second. "We need to get out," Marcus said, voice still calm, still rational, still believing this was a malfunction rather than design. He turned toward the stone steps where Jake had entered minutes earlier, but Jake was already moving, his body understanding before his mind caught up. The water that had felt therapeutic at 105 degrees was climbing toward 110, then 115. The heat no longer soothing but aggressive, demanding, the minerals in the water turning it into a conductor of pain. Jake reached the steps and dove underwater, eyes open despite the sting, searching for the exit. His fingers found stone, found railroad ties, found the smooth surface of steel where no steel should be. He surfaced, gasping, water streaming from his hair. "There's something blocking the steps," he shouted. "Like a gate. It's locked." The Eugene commune member named river-born Patricia Brennan in Dayton, Ohio, but that name belonged to a person she'd stopped being tried the same approach from a different angle. She was a strong swimmer, had lifeguarded through college before dropping out to find something more authentic than chlorinated pools and screaming children. She dove deep, fingers exploring the perimeter of the pool, searching for any gap in the railroad ties, any weakness in the construction. She found only precision. The ties fit together with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of planning, of intention, of men who'd built this specifically to hold what it now held. She surfaced near the center, treading water that felt like it was beginning to pulse with its own heartbeat. "The whole pool is sealed," she gasped. "They've trapped us." The word trapped transformed confusion into panic. Anna from Sacramento tried to climb the railroad ties directly, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on wood that decades of mineral water had made slick as soap. She got 2 feet up before her hand slipped, and she fell backward, the splash sending droplets that steamed in the cold air. A younger Eugene member, 19-year-old Daniel Chen, no relation to Marcus, though they joked about it earlier, tried to wedge his body between 2 ties, thinking maybe he could squeeze through. The gap was 3 inches wide. His shoulders were 18 inches across. Trapped is just physics. The Colton brothers watched from their positions around the pool, expressions neutral as men observing cattle loading into trucks. Leonard still held his beer. Condensation running down the bottle in the 40-degree air, a detail so mundane it felt obscene. Raymond had lit a cigarette, the ember glowing orange against the darkness beyond the tiki torches. Dale crouched by the rocks, one hand resting near the valve that could save 11 lives with a single turn, and made no move toward mercy. Marcus Chen forced himself to think like a scientist. Rising temperature, closed system, no visible inlet for cold water, which meant the heat source was still active, still feeding into the pool, the spring's natural output being directed entirely into their prison. His thesis advisor had taught him that geothermal springs varied in temperature based on depth of origin, mineral content, and flow rate. The spring feeding this pool had to be drawing from deep sources 140 degrees or higher, which meant without cold water mixing, the pool would eventually reach equilibrium with the source. 140 degrees was the temperature at which human skin began to literally cook. "Please," Sarah called to Leonard, her voice cracking with heat and terror. "There are 11 of us. This is murder. You can't." "I can't?" Leonard interrupted, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "Tell me, which law says I can't protect my property? You cut my fence, trespassed on my land, soaked in my water. One of you killed my calf." He gestured to his brothers. "To the pool, to the theater of torches and steam. We invited you in. You came willingly. If the water's too hot, well, hot springs can be dangerous. Should have read the warning signs. There were no warning signs. They all knew it. He knew they knew it. River tried reasoning. "We'll leave. Right now. We'll pay for the fence, the calf, whatever you want. Just let us out." "Can't let you out," Raymond said, exhaling smoke. "Gate stuck. Mechanical failure. These old springs, the minerals seize up the works. Tragic, really." The water hit 120 degrees at 11:34 p.m. Sarah's skin had turned lobster red, her breathing shallow and rapid as her body fought to cool itself through evaporation that couldn't keep pace with the heat. The Eugene members had clustered in the center of the pool, treading water, trying to keep their heads above the surface where the air was cooler, but their legs dangled in liquid that was rapidly approaching the temperature of a hot tub turned malicious. Marcus dove again, this time searching not for an exit, but for the inlet, if he could find where the hot water entered. Maybe block it, slow it, buy time for someone to find help. His hands traced the pool bottom, feeling the smooth concrete until he found it. A 6-inch pipe. Water gushing through with enough pressure to suggest a substantial flow rate. He tried to cover it with his body, but the water was too hot to tolerate direct contact, scorching his chest until he had to pull away. Jake had a different idea. If they couldn't escape through the bottom or sides, maybe they could climb out the top. He positioned himself under Anna, boosting her up, her feet on his shoulders as she reached for the edge of the pool. Her fingers cleared the railroad ties by 6 inches. She could almost grab the ground beyond, pull herself up and over, but her hands were wet, and the heat had sapped her strength and the angle was wrong. She fell again, this time landing hard enough that Jake heard something crack his collarbone, or hers. Impossible to tell in the chaos. The youngest commune member, a girl named Willow who couldn't have been more than 20, started to cry. Not sobbing, just tears running down her face, mixing with the pool water that was beginning to feel less like water and more like liquid pain. Her boyfriend, Michael, held her, but his embrace offered no protection from the heat that came from everywhere at once. "What would you have done?" Jake shouted at the Coltons, his voice raw. "If you were us? If someone had trapped you?" Dale Colton finally spoke, his voice flat as the desert horizon. "We wouldn't have cut someone else's fence, wouldn't have trespassed, wouldn't have assumed the world owed us free anything." He paused, flicked ash from his cigarette. "We were raised different." The water reached 125 degrees, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the tiki torches, headlights appeared on the access road, a fourth vehicle, late arrivals following the same hand-drawn map, 3 more people heading toward the welcoming glow of firelight and steam. The headlights belonged to a 1972 Volkswagen camper van, engine rattling like a box of bolts. And inside sat 3 people who had approximately 90 seconds to decide whether they'd be witnesses, accomplices, or corpses. Every crime requires an audience to stay hidden, or collaborators to keep it buried, and the Coltons needed to determine which category these newcomers would fill. Leonard saw them first, the distinct round headlights cutting through sagebrush, following the same dirt track the others had used. He checked his watch, 11:38 p.m., earlier than expected. The map had suggested midnight as the optimal soaking time, designed to stagger arrivals, to give the first group time to be dealt with before complications arrived. But here they were. Complications incarnate. Grinding up the access road in second gear, Dale moved to intercept, walking beyond the torch perimeter with the casual stride of a rancher greeting neighbors. His hand rested on his belt, near the revolver he'd carried since he was 16, but his body language broadcast welcome. The van shuddered to a stop, and 3 people emerged. A man in his 40s with a graying ponytail, a woman roughly the same age wearing turquoise jewelry and a flowing skirt, and a teenage boy who looked bored with the whole enterprise. "Evening," Dale called out. "You folks here for the spring?" In the pool, Marcus heard the van's engine die and understood this was either salvation or the expansion of the Colton's body count. He tried to shout a warning, but the water had climbed to 128 degrees, and his throat felt scorched. his voice emerging as a croak that didn't carry beyond the steam. Sarah grabbed his arm, her fingers weak, her skin the color of boiled shrimp. She was going into shock, her body's core temperature rising past the point where internal regulation functioned. The man with the ponytail introduced himself as Robert Finch, a chiropractor from Fresno, traveling with his wife Linda and their son Jeremy. They'd found the map at a health food store, had been searching for the spring for 2 hours, were about to give up when they saw the torchlight. His voice carried the eager innocence of someone who still believed the universe was fundamentally benevolent. "Pool's full at the moment," Dale said, gesturing vaguely toward the steam. "Popular night, full moon and all. But you're welcome to wait, or come back tomorrow when it's less crowded." Linda Finch peered past him, trying to see through the steam and darkness. "Are those people screaming?" she asked. "It sounds like someone's hurt." "Hot springs can be intense," Dale replied, his smile never wavering. "Some folks aren't used to the heat. They'll adjust, or they'll get out. Nature's way of teaching respect." From the courthouse deposition of Linda Finch, November 3rd, 1975. "I heard them. I absolutely heard them screaming. But the rancher said it was normal, said people always made noise when they first got in hot water. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because not believing would have meant doing something." Jeremy Finch, bored teenager, had wandered closer to the pool while his parents talked. He saw bodies thrashing in water that steamed like a cauldron, saw hands clawing at railroad ties, saw faces contorted in agony that had nothing to do with therapeutic heat. He saw Marcus Chen trying to hold Sarah above the surface, while his own legs kicked frantically to keep them both afloat. He saw River attempting one more time to dive for the gate, her body disappearing beneath water that looked wrong. Too much steam, too much movement, too much desperation. "Dad," Jeremy said, his voice cutting through the adult conversation. "Something's wrong. Those people are dying." Robert Finch joined his son at the edge of the torchlight. What he saw conflicted with what Dale had told him, with what the map had promised, with what his comfortable worldview allowed. He saw suffering that looked deliberate, imprisonment that looked planned. He saw Leonard Colton standing near a valve, hand resting on the wheel, position suggesting control rather than helplessness. He saw Raymond with his cigarette and beer, watching the pool like a man watching television. Horror witnessed becomes horror shared. "We need to call the sheriff," Robert said, turning back to Dale. "Those people need help. They're trapped in there." Dale's hand moved from his belt to Robert's shoulder, a gesture that could be read as friendly or threatening depending on how much pressure the fingers applied. "No phone lines out here," he said. "Nearest phone is 37 miles back toward town. By the time you drove there and back, this whole thing will have resolved itself. Hot springs cool down, people get out. Everybody learns a valuable lesson about respecting private property and reading warning signs." "There are no warning signs," Linda said, her voice shaking. "Sure there are," Raymond called from his position. "Posted every quarter mile. No trespassing. Private property. Enter at your own risk. These folks cut our fence to get here, trespassed on our land. We tried to be hospitable, invited them to soak, and now the spring's running too hot. Acts of God happen. Springs fluctuate, can't control geothermal activity." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Robert almost accepted it, almost convinced himself that what he was seeing was a natural tragedy rather than a manufactured execution. The human mind does extraordinary work to avoid confronting evil that demands action. In the pool, the temperature hit 130 degrees. Daniel Chen, the 19-year-old from Eugene, lost consciousness first. His eyes rolled back and his body went limp, floating face down in water that had become indistinguishable from cooking liquid. Michael tried to reach him, to flip him over, but Michael's own coordination was failing, his muscles cramping from heat exhaustion, his brain cooking in his skull. He managed to grab Daniel's arm, to pull his face above water, but Daniel didn't breathe. His skin had blistered across the shoulders and back, the water dissolving the boundary between dermis and epidermis in a process that would only accelerate as the temperature continued climbing. Jake Morrison, the Sacramento friend who'd hesitated before entering, made one final attempt at escape. He positioned himself under the gate, pressed his back against the stone steps, and pushed upward with his legs, trying to generate enough force to bend the steel or break the lock. His thighs were the strongest part of his body, cyclist's legs, built from thousands of miles, but steel doesn't negotiate with muscle. The gate held. Something in Jake's back didn't. He felt a vertebra shift, felt nerve-endings scream, and his legs stopped responding to commands. Sarah Dietrich stopped struggling. She leaned into Marcus, her head on his shoulder, her breathing shallow and rapid. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have known. Should have seen it." "Seen what?" Marcus asked, though speech took effort, though his own thoughts were fragmenting from the heat. That paradise doesn't leave maps. That welcome from strangers is the oldest trap. That free anything costs everything. Robert Finch stood at the boundary between torchlight and darkness, between intervention and complicity, between the person he'd thought he was and the person this moment was revealing. His wife gripped his arm. His son stared at the pool with an expression that would cost thousands of dollars in therapy to partially address. The Coltons watched him with the patience of men who'd already calculated the outcomes. He could drive toward town, alert authorities, return to find the pool empty and the Coltons denying everything, his word against theirs. No evidence except corpses that could easily be explained as reckless trespassers who'd ignored warnings. He could try to help rush the pool, try to lift the gate, fight 3 armed ranchers in the dark while his family watched. Or he could accept the story being offered. A tragic accident, geothermal fluctuation, trespassers who paid the price for their arrogance. Robert Finch chose the third option, and in making that choice, transformed from witness to accessory. "We should go," he said to his family, his voice hollow. "This isn't our business." The Volkswagen's taillights disappeared down the access road at 11:46 p.m., red eyes winking out in the darkness, carrying with them the last chance anyone in the pool had of surviving this night. Robert Finch would spend the next 3 decades trying to forget the sounds that followed him down that dirt road, the screams that turned to whimpers, that turned to nothing. In the pool, the water reached 132 degrees, the temperature at which human tissue begins irreversible breakdown, at which skin separates from muscle, at which the body stops being a machine that might recover and becomes simply meat responding to heat. Marcus Chen still held Sarah, though she'd stopped responding to his voice approximately 4 minutes earlier. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her breathing so shallow that only the slight rise of her chest confirmed she was technically still alive. The Eugene commune had clustered into a tight circle, bodies pressed together in some primal instinct toward collective survival that physics refused to honor. Heat didn't care about solidarity. Willow had stopped crying. Michael still held her, but his arms had gone slack, his body operating on autonomic functions alone. Heartbeat, respiration, nothing more sophisticated than brainstem commands. River floated nearby, face down, her long hair spread across the surface like dark seaweed, no longer making any attempt to search for exits that didn't exist. Anna, from Sacramento, had tried one more time to climb the railroad ties, her burned hands scrabbling for purchase, and had fallen backward into water that felt like molten glass. She didn't surface. Jake Morrison, paralyzed from his failed attempt to lift the gate, floated on his back, staring at stars that suddenly seemed impossibly distant, impossibly cold, impossibly indifferent to the mathematics of suffering occurring 8 feet below. Heat knows no mercy. At 134 degrees, the first heart stopped. Daniel Chen, who'd lost consciousness minutes earlier, whose body had been held above water by Michael's failing strength, simply ceased. His heart, overheated past the point where electrical signals could coordinate muscle contractions, fibrillated and then stilled. He sank slowly, his body drifting toward the bottom where the hottest water pooled, drawn down by gravity and the weight of a life that had lasted 19 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Leonard Colton checked his watch again, 11:53 p.m. His hand moved to the valve controlling the spring's hottest flow, not to close it, just to confirm it was fully open, doing its work, completing the task they'd engineered. His father, Walter, had returned to his chair, face still hidden in shadow, but his breathing was audible, now slow, measured, the rhythm of a man waiting for something inevitable. By midnight, 6 of the 11 were unconscious. The water had stabilized at 136 degrees, approximately 4 degrees below the temperature at which water boils at their elevation. The Colton brothers stood their watch with the patience of men who'd spent lifetimes managing livestock, understanding that death on a ranch came in various forms: drought, disease, predation, market fluctuations, and this was simply another version of culling. Marcus Chen felt his own consciousness fragmenting. His PhD in environmental science provided him with perfect understanding of what was happening to his body: hyperthermia, cardiovascular collapse, protein denaturation, multi-organ failure. But understanding didn't slow the process. Sarah had gone still in his arms. He couldn't tell if she was breathing. The water around them had turned slightly pink from ruptured capillaries, from blistered skin sloughing off, from the organic breakdown that occurred when human bodies met temperatures they weren't designed to withstand. His last coherent thought was a calculation. 11 people, average body weight 150 pounds, specific heat capacity of human tissue approximately 3.5 kilojoules per kilogram per degree Celsius. He was computing the total thermal energy required to kill them all when his own heart stopped sending reliable signals to his brain. The Eugene commune died as a group, their bodies tangled together in the center of the pool, hands still touching, still trying to offer comfort that physics couldn't deliver. Their deaths came in a sequence separated by minutes, first the weakest, then the strongest, then everyone in between, until the water held only corpses maintaining temperature equilibrium with the spring that had killed them. Jake Morrison lasted longest, his athlete's cardiovascular system fighting past the point where others surrendered. He saw the stars blur, saw the tiki torches double and triple, saw Leonard Colton's face appear above him, looking down with an expression that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't regret either. Something colder. Evaluation. The look a rancher gives a sick calf before deciding whether treatment is worth the expense. At 12:17 a.m. on September 22, 1975, the pool fell completely silent except for the burble of the spring and the hiss of steam rising into cold desert air. Leonard waited another 15 minutes before nodding to his brothers. Dale walked to the valve by the rocks and turned it counterclockwise, opening the cold creek inlet. Raymond moved to the spring's hot valve and began reducing flow. The water temperature would drop naturally now, eventually reaching a level that wouldn't immediately reveal what had happened here. 105 degrees was therapeutic. 115 was careless. 136 was murder. They needed the pool to cool to plausible deniability. By 1 a.m., the water had dropped to 120 degrees. Dale released the underwater gate, the steel plate sliding back into its hidden position beneath the stone steps. The exit appeared, as if it had always been there, as if 11 people simply hadn't thought to use it. The Coltons worked with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and silent. They removed the bodies one at a time, carrying them beyond the torchlight to a spot they'd prepared 3 days earlier, a natural erosion wash that flash floods had carved into the desert floor, deep enough to hold what needed holding. They laid the corpses in rows, arranged with a care that somehow made the scene worse than random dumping would have. Walter Colton finally stood from his chair and approached the wash, his flashlight beam playing across 11 faces that had trusted a hand-drawn map. He studied them for a long moment, then turned to his sons. "Burn their vehicles," he said. "Strip them first. Plates, registrations, anything with names. Then push them into the Ralston wash make it look like joyriders went off-road in the dark. Fire should handle the rest. From the Nevada County Sheriff's Report, September 24, 1975. 3 vehicles discovered burned in Ralston Wash, approximately 42 miles northeast of Tonopah. No bodies recovered at scene. Evidence suggests vehicles were abandoned and subsequently caught fire, possibly from camping equipment or discarded cigarettes. No signs of foul play. Case filed as abandoned property. The 3 vehicles burned through the night. Flames visible for miles across the empty desert, drawing no witnesses because no one lived close enough to witness anything. By dawn, they were skeletal frames and melted plastic, unidentifiable except as general shapes that had once been transportation. The bodies stayed in the wash until the Coltons could transport them, one at a time over the following week, to various locations across 3 counties. A mine shaft outside Goldfield, a dry well on abandoned BLM land, the bottom of a reservoir during drought conditions, places where discovery was unlikely and identification would be impossible even if someone stumbled across bones years later. The pool itself was drained, scrubbed, and refilled with the Cold Creek water running at normal flow. The tiki torches were stored in the barn. The railroad ties were pressure washed until no trace of pink remained. By September 23rd, the spring looked exactly as it had before, a natural hot spring on private property, surrounded by barbed wire and no trespassing signs. The Coltons added 3 more strands to the fence line, raising it from 5 to 8, the new wire glinting silver in the morning sun. The first missing person report was filed on September 25, 1975, at the Berkeley Police Department, and it would take 3 more weeks before anyone connected 11 disappearances to a stretch of Nevada desert that officially held nothing but sagebrush and silence. When people vanish into wilderness, society needs to decide whether to search or simply wait for the desert to return what it's willing to release. Sarah Dietrich's mother, Margaret, called the Berkeley campus housing office when her daughter missed their weekly Sunday phone call. Sarah never missed those calls, not during finals, not during field research trips, not ever. The housing administrator checked Sarah's room and found it exactly as she'd left it. Thesis notes spread across the desk, a half-empty coffee mug growing mold, a calendar with Nevada hot springs, research trip, written across September 20th through 22nd, in Sarah's precise handwriting. Margaret Dietrich filed the report, providing the detective with one crucial detail. Sarah had mentioned visiting a hot spring she'd found advertised at a co-op in Reno, something about geothermal research for her environmental science thesis. The detective, a 15-year veteran named Thomas Calabrese, took notes with professional sympathy and zero urgency. Graduate students went off-grid all the time. They found themselves. They found drugs. They found communes and decided civilization was a prison. Sarah would probably call next week, embarrassed, asking for money. Except Sarah never called. The Eugene commune was reported missing on September 28th by the property manager of the farm they'd been renting. 6 people River, Michael, Willow, Daniel, and 2 others, named Forrest and Rain, had paid through October 1st and left behind all their possessions, clothes, books, a garden they'd spent 4 months cultivating. The property manager wasn't concerned about the people so much as the rent, but protocol required reporting tenants who'd abandoned belongings worth more than $500. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office filed the report and did precisely nothing with it. Hippies were migratory. They followed seasons, rumors of free land, whispers of spiritual awakening. 6 missing commune members barely registered as unusual. Jake Morrison, Anna Chen, and their friend Derek Liu, the Sacramento trio, were reported missing by Jake's sister on October 3rd. She'd been expecting them back by September 24th for her wedding. Jake was supposed to walk her down the aisle. He'd never missed anything important in his life. His absence at her wedding felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate, like a chord missing its root note. The Sacramento Police Department took her report, filed it alongside approximately 200 other missing person cases active in California that month, and told her to wait 30 days before assuming the worst. 11 missing became 11 separate bureaucratic inconveniences. The Finch family, Robert, Linda, and Jeremy, returned to Fresno on September 22nd, their Volkswagen van silent for the entire drive, the weight of what they'd witnessed pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. They didn't speak about the pool, the screams, the Colton's casual monitoring of death. They didn't speak at all. Jeremy went to his room and stayed there for 3 days, emerging only for meals he barely touched. Linda spent hours in the shower, trying to scrub away the memory of sounds her brain kept replaying. Robert sat in his chiropractor's office, seeing patients, adjusting spines, offering therapeutic touch, while his own hands trembled with the knowledge of what they'd refused to do. On October 7th, Linda broke. She called the Fresno Police Department and asked to speak to someone about a possible crime. The desk sergeant transferred her to Detective Wayne Morris, who listened to her story with increasing skepticism. A hot spring, screaming people, ranchers who claimed it was normal, but she'd left, driven away, hadn't called from the nearest town, hadn't reported it for 15 days. "Ma'am," Morris said, his voice carrying the particular patience reserved for unreliable witnesses, "did you actually see anyone die?" "No," Linda admitted, "but I heard them. I heard them screaming. Hot springs can be dangerous. People misjudge the temperature. Did you see any bodies?" "No." "But did these ranchers threaten you or your family?" "No. They told us to leave, so you left. And now, 2 weeks later, you're reporting what exactly? That some people were in hot water and making noise?" "That's not a crime, ma'am. That's Tuesday at a Reno casino hot tub." The conversation lasted another 8 minutes, producing exactly 0 investigative action. Morris filed a report coded as suspicious circumstances, unverified, and moved on to cases with actual evidence. The report sat in a filing cabinet in Fresno, 300 miles from where it might have mattered, in a jurisdiction that had no authority over Nevada ranch land. From the deposition of Detective Wayne Morris, December 11th, 1976. In hindsight, yes, I should have contacted Nevada authorities. But the witness was uncertain, the timeline was delayed, and frankly, we get calls like that weekly. People see things, they imagine things, they call us weeks later, expecting us to investigate their regrets. The missing persons reports might have remained disconnected forever, except for one detail. Marcus Chen's faculty advisor at Berkeley, Professor Elizabeth Hartwell, who'd been waiting for Sarah's thesis updates. When both Sarah and Marcus missed their October 1st meeting, Hartwell started asking questions. She found Sarah's room, found Marcus's apartment, also undisturbed, found the calendar notation about Nevada, and began making phone calls. By October 15th, she'd compiled a list. 2 Berkeley students, 6 Eugene Commune members, 3 Sacramento friends. 11 people, all missing. All last known to have been traveling through Nevada in late September. All with some connection to hot springs, alternative lifestyles, or back to the land movements. Hartwell took her research to the FBI field office in San Francisco, requesting they investigate a possible pattern. The agent who met with her, Special Agent David Reeves, was more receptive than local police had been. 11 people from 3 different locations, disappearing in the same geographical area during the same time window, exceeded coincidence thresholds. He opened a preliminary investigation on October 20th, 1975. Reeves started with the co-ops. He found the bulletin board at the High Desert Co-op in Reno, where the original map had been posted. The map was gone, of course, but 2 employees remembered it. One had even made a photocopy for her boyfriend, thinking about visiting the spring themselves. She'd thrown it away after her boyfriend broke up with her, but she remembered the general location, northeast of Tonopah, private land despite the map's claims of BLM access. Something about a ranch. Reeves began canvassing ranches in the target area on October 27th. He arrived at the Colton property at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, finding Leonard working on a tractor engine, hands black with grease, expression friendly, but guarded in the way of rural people encountering federal badges. "We're looking into some missing persons," Reeves explained, showing photographs of Marcus, Sarah, and the Eugene group. "Have you seen any of these people? They might have been looking for hot springs in this area." Leonard studied the photos with apparent care, his grease-stained finger leaving smudges on Marcus Chen's Berkeley ID photo. "Can't say I have," he said finally. "We get trespassers sometimes, kids cutting the fence to use our spring without permission. But I run them off. Don't keep records of faces." "Your spring?" Reeves asked. "Is it open to the public?" "Hell no. Private property. Posted signs every quarter mile. We had problems with hippies thinking it was some kind of free resort. Had to get serious about enforcement." He gestured toward the fence line, the 8 strands of barbed wire glinting in afternoon sun. "Added extra security after some trespassers killed one of my calves." Reeves walked the property with Leonard's permission, examining the spring area. He saw a natural pool, approximately 8 feet deep, lined with railroad ties, temperature pleasantly warm when he tested it with his hand. He saw no signs of struggle, no evidence of bodies, no indication that anything unusual had occurred here. The water was crystal clear. The stones were clean. Even the railroad ties showed no staining beyond normal mineral deposits. "You ever have problems with the spring running too hot?" Reeves asked. "Sometimes," Leonard admitted. "Geothermal activity fluctuates. We had to install controls to keep it safe for the cattle. Too hot, and they won't drink. Too cold in winter, and it freezes. It's a balance." What Reeves didn't see, the valve that could redirect the hottest flow, the hidden gate mechanism beneath the steps, the erosion wash where bodies had been temporarily stored. The evidence had been engineered to disappear as completely as the lives it had ended. Reeves left the Colton ranch with nothing actionable. His report, filed November 4th, 1975, concluded, "No evidence of foul play at Colton property. Spring appears safe and well-maintained. Owner reports problems with trespassers, but no recent incidents. Investigation continuing." The FBI file on the 11 missing persons remained open but inactive, eventually absorbed into the vast database of Americans who'd simply vanished into the 1970s, a decade when disappearing seemed almost fashionable, when the counterculture's rejection of straight society meant thousands of people dropped off grids that barely existed to begin with. At the Colton Ranch, life continued with the rhythm of seasonal work and unspoken understanding, but one small detail had Dale Colton started drinking at 9 a.m. on November 3rd, 1975, exactly 6 weeks after the killings. And by Christmas, he was averaging a bottle of Jim Beam daily, the alcohol doing what conscience couldn't, punishing him for what his hands had done. Perfect crimes don't exist because human beings can't carry perfect silence, and weight finds cracks in even the strongest foundations. The ranch house smelled of coffee grounds and leather, wood smoke from the potbelly stove, mixing with the particular staleness of a building that hadn't seen a woman's touch since Walter's wife died in 1968. Dale sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd planned the pool modifications, staring at his hands. Rancher's hands, scarred from barbed wire and cattle work, capable hands that had turned a valve and watched 11 people cook. He poured 3 fingers of bourbon into his coffee, drank it in 2 swallows, poured again. Leonard watched his brother's deterioration with growing concern that had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with operational security. Guilt was a liability. Drinking led to loose talk. Loose talk led to questions the FBI agent had already started asking. On December 8th, Leonard drove Dale to a VA hospital in Reno. Dale had served in Korea, qualified for services, and had him admitted for agricultural accident, trauma, and associated depression. The intake psychiatrist notes, obtained through FOIA request in 2003, patient presents with symptoms consistent with PTSD, though combat exposure occurred over 20 years ago. Reports intrusive thoughts, nightmares involving drowning despite no personal history of near drowning. Demonstrates hypervigilance and guilt ideation. Recommended 30-day inpatient treatment. Dale stayed 17 days. He learned to tell the doctors what they wanted to hear, that his nightmares were about Korea, that his guilt stemmed from surviving when others hadn't, that the bourbon was self-medication for memories of Incheon and Chosin Reservoir. He never mentioned September 21st, never mentioned steam rising from water that turned pink, never mentioned the sound a body makes hitting the bottom of a pool after consciousness fails. He returned to the ranch on Christmas Eve, sober but hollow, and resumed drinking on Christmas Day. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, Robert Finch's marriage was collapsing under the weight of witnessed horror and chosen inaction. Linda had stopped speaking to him in any meaningful way beyond logistical necessity. Jeremy had been expelled from school for fighting 3 separate incidents where he'd beaten other students badly enough to require medical attention. The school counselor suggested family therapy. Robert agreed, then canceled the first appointment, then the second, then stopped scheduling them entirely. On January 14, 1976, Linda filed for divorce. The paperwork cited irreconcilable differences, which was technically accurate if those differences included one spouse having watched people die and done nothing while the other spouse had done the same but couldn't. Live with it. From Linda Finch's journal, January 20th, 1976. I hear them every night, the screaming. I told myself it was just people being dramatic about hot water, but I knew. In my bones, I knew. And I got in the van, and I drove away. And now I can't drive anywhere without seeing taillights in my rearview mirror and wondering what I left behind. Jeremy Finch, now 16, made a different choice. On February 9th, 1976, he hitchhiked from Fresno to the FBI field office in San Francisco and asked to speak to whoever was investigating missing persons in Nevada. Special Agent Reeves sat across from a teenage boy with split knuckles and eyes that had seen too much, and listened to a story that changed everything. My dad and I saw them, Jeremy said. September 21st. At a ranch northeast of Tonopah, there were people trapped in a pool, and the ranchers were just watching them die. Reeves pulled the dormant case file, spread photographs across his desk. These people, Jeremy identified Marcus Chen, Sarah Dietrich, and 3 of the Eugene commune members. I didn't see all their faces clearly, but yes, these people, they were in the water, screaming. The ranchers said it was normal. My dad believed them, or pretended to. Why didn't you report this in September? Reeves asked, his voice carefully neutral. Because I was 14. Because my dad said it wasn't our business. Because I didn't understand what I was seeing until I couldn't stop seeing it. Jeremy's hands shook. I dream about them every night. I need to know if they're dead. I need to know if we could have saved them. Guilt is the evidence that won't burn. Reeves reopened the investigation with new urgency. He obtained warrants for the Colton property on February 15th, arriving with a forensics team and 2 Nevada State Police detectives. Leonard met them at the gate, his face carefully composed in an expression of confused cooperation. Agent Reeves, didn't expect to see you again. What's this about? We have reason to believe 11 people may have died on your property in September. We need to search the premises. Died? Leonard's surprise seemed genuine, practiced in mirrors until it looked real. That's crazy. I told you, we get trespassers, but nobody's died here. You're welcome to look, but you're wasting time. The forensics team spent 4 days examining the spring, the pool, the surrounding area. They drained the pool and scraped samples from the railroad ties. They tested the water at various temperatures and flow rates. They examined the fence line, the access roads, the barn, the house. They searched for graves, for evidence of cremation, for any sign that 11 bodies had been anywhere near this property. They found nothing. The railroad ties showed mineral staining consistent with years of use. The pool mechanism functioned normally, no hidden gates or unusual valves visible to cursory inspection. The erosion wash where bodies had been temporarily stored showed no evidence of human remains, though soil samples contained elevated nitrogen levels consistent with decomposition, but also consistent with animal carcasses, livestock birth waste, or natural organic decay. The Coltons had scrubbed their crime scene with the thoroughness of men who understood evidence, who'd had time to eliminate traces, who'd engineered their setup to disappear. Reeves interrogated each brother separately. Leonard maintained consistent denial, trespassers yes, deaths no. Raymond claimed he'd been in Reno during September, visiting a girlfriend whose existence couldn't be verified but couldn't be disproven either. Dale, still battling alcoholism, broke down crying during his interview, but insisted his trauma came from Korea, not Nevada. His tears genuine, but aimed at the wrong crime. Walter Colton, the 72-year-old patriarch, refused to answer questions without an attorney present. When his attorney arrived, a Tonopah lawyer named Marcus Brennan, who'd represented ranch families for 30 years, Walter invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and said nothing beyond confirming his name. The investigation stalled again. Jeremy Finch's testimony established that people had been at the spring on September 21st, but not that they'd died. Without bodies, without physical evidence, without witnesses beyond a traumatized teenager whose father had already contradicted his story, the FBI had circumstantial suspicion but nothing approaching prosecutable proof. Robert Finch, when finally interviewed under oath on March 2, 1976, told a version of events that contradicted his son's account. He admitted visiting the ranch but claimed the people in the pool had seemed fine, just enthusiastic about hot water. He denied hearing screams, denied seeing anyone trapped, attributed his son's story to teenage imagination and family stress related to the divorce. From the FBI case file, March 8, 1976. Investigation hampered by lack of physical evidence, contradictory witness testimony, and passage of time. 11 individuals remain missing, but connection to Colton property cannot be established beyond reasonable doubt. Recommend continued monitoring, but no charges at this time. The case went cold. The missing persons remained missing. The Coltons remained free. And in the VA hospital, where Dale Colton had returned for his third admission, a night nurse found him in the chapel at 3 a.m., kneeling before an altar he didn't believe in, whispering the same 11 numbers over and over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. When the nurse asked what he was counting, Dale looked at her with eyes that held no present, only past, and said, "The ones who trusted the map." But it would take 23 more years and one brother's deathbed confession before those numbers would finally attach to names, and even then, the desert would keep most of its secrets. Changed that wouldn't be noticed for years. Dale Colton started drinking at 9 a.m. on November 3, 1975, exactly 6 weeks after the killings. And by Christmas, he was averaging a bottle of Jim Beam daily, the alcohol doing what conscience couldn't, punishing him for what his hands had done. Perfect crimes don't exist because human beings can't carry perfect silence, and weight finds cracks in even the strongest foundations. The ranch house smelled of coffee grounds and leather. Wood smoke from the potbelly stove, mixing with the particular staleness of a building that hadn't seen a woman's touch since Walter's wife died in 1968. Dale sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd planned the pool modifications, staring at his hands. Ranchers' hands, scarred from barbed wire and cattle work, capable hands that had turned a valve and watched 11 people cook. He poured 3 fingers of bourbon into his coffee, drank it in 2 swallows, poured again. Leonard watched his brother's deterioration with growing concern that had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with operational security. Guilt was a liability. Drinking led to loose talk. Loose talk led to questions the FBI agent had already started asking. On December 8th, Leonard drove Dale to a VA hospital in Reno. Dale had served in Korea, qualified for services, and had him admitted for agricultural accident trauma and associated depression. The intake psychiatrist notes, obtained through FOIA request in 2003, patient presents with symptoms consistent with PTSD, though combat exposure occurred over 20 years ago. Reports intrusive thoughts, nightmares involving drowning despite no personal history of near drowning. Demonstrates hypervigilance and guilt ideation. Recommended 30-day inpatient treatment. Dale stayed 17 days. He learned to tell the doctors what they wanted to hear, that his nightmares were about Korea, that his guilt stemmed from surviving when others hadn't, that the bourbon was self-medication for memories of Incheon and Chosin Reservoir. He never mentioned September 21st. Never mentioned steam rising from water that turned pink. Never mentioned the sound a body makes hitting the bottom of a pool after consciousness fails. He returned to the ranch on Christmas Eve, sober but hollow, and resumed drinking on Christmas Day. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, Robert Finch's marriage was collapsing under the weight of witnessed horror and chosen inaction. Linda had stopped speaking to him in any meaningful way beyond logistical necessity. Jeremy had been expelled from school for fighting 3 separate incidents where he'd beaten other students badly enough to require medical attention. The school counselor suggested family therapy. Robert agreed, then canceled the first appointment, then the second, then stopped scheduling them entirely. On January 14, 1976, Linda filed for divorce. The paperwork cited irreconcilable differences, which was technically accurate if those differences included one spouse having watched people die and done nothing, while the other spouse had done the same but couldn't. Live with it. From Linda Finch's journal, January 20th, 1976. I hear them every night, the screaming. I told myself it was just people being dramatic about hot water, but I knew. In my bones, I knew. And I got in the van, and I drove away. And now I can't drive anywhere without seeing taillights in my rearview mirror and wondering what I left behind. Jeremy Finch, now 16, made a different choice. On February 9th, 1976, he hitchhiked from Fresno to the FBI field office in San Francisco and asked to speak to whoever was investigating missing persons in Nevada. Special Agent Reeves sat across from a teenage boy with split knuckles and eyes that had seen too much and listened to a story that changed everything. My dad and I saw them, Jeremy said. September 21st, at a ranch northeast of Tonopah. There were people trapped in a pool, and the ranchers were just watching them die. Reeves pulled the dormant case file, spread photographs across his desk. These people? Jeremy identified Marcus Chen, Sarah Dietrich, and 3 of the Eugene commune members. I didn't see all their faces clearly, but yes, these people, they were in the water, screaming. The ranchers said it was normal. My dad believed them, or pretended to. Why didn't you report this in September? Reeves asked, his voice carefully neutral. Because I was 14. Because my dad said it wasn't our business. Because I didn't understand what I was seeing until I couldn't stop seeing it. Jeremy's hands shook. I dream about them, every night. I need to know if they're dead. I need to know if we could have saved them. Guilt is the evidence that won't burn. Reeves reopened the investigation with new urgency. He obtained warrants for the Colton property on February 15th, arriving with a forensics team and 2 Nevada State Police detectives. Leonard met them at the gate, his face carefully composed in an expression of confused cooperation. Agent Reeves, didn't expect to see you again. What's this about? We have reason to believe 11 people may have died on your property in September. We need to search the premises. Died? Leonard's surprise seemed genuine, practiced in mirrors, until it looked real. That's crazy. I told you, we get trespassers, but nobody's died here. You're welcome to look, but you're wasting time. The forensics team spent 4 days examining the spring, the pool, the surrounding area. They drained the pool and scraped samples from the railroad ties. They tested the water at various temperatures and flow rates. They examined the fence line, the access roads, the barn, the house. They searched for graves, for evidence of cremation, for any sign that 11 bodies had been anywhere near this property. They found nothing. The railroad ties showed mineral staining consistent with years of use. The pool mechanism functioned normally. No hidden gates or unusual valves visible to cursory inspection. The erosion wash where bodies had been temporarily stored showed no evidence of human remains. Those soil samples contained elevated nitrogen levels consistent with decomposition, but also consistent with animal carcasses, livestock, birth waste, or natural organic decay. The Coltons had scrubbed their crime scene with the thoroughness of men who understood evidence, who'd had time to eliminate traces, who'd engineered their setup to disappear. Reeves interrogated each brother separately. Leonard maintained consistent denial: trespassers, yes; deaths, no. Raymond claimed he'd been in Reno during September, visiting a girlfriend whose existence couldn't be verified but couldn't be disproven either. Dale, still battling alcoholism, broke down crying during his interview, but insisted his trauma came from Korea, not Nevada. His tears genuine, but aimed at the wrong crime. Walter Colton, the 72-year-old patriarch, refused to answer questions without an attorney present. When his attorney arrived, a Tonopah lawyer named Marcus Brennan, who'd represented ranch families for 30 years, Walter invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and said nothing beyond confirming his name. The investigation stalled again. Jeremy Finch's testimony established that people had been at the spring on September 21st, but not that they'd died. Without bodies, without physical evidence, without witnesses beyond a traumatized teenager whose father had already contradicted his story, the FBI had circumstantial suspicion but nothing approaching prosecutable proof. Robert Finch, when finally interviewed under oath on March 2, 1976, told a version of events that contradicted his son's account. He admitted visiting the ranch, but claimed the people in the pool had seemed fine, just enthusiastic about hot water. He denied hearing screams, denied seeing anyone trapped, attributed his son's story to teenage imagination and family stress related to the divorce. From the FBI case file, March 8, 1976. Investigation hampered by lack of physical evidence, contradictory witness testimony, and passage of time. 11 individuals remain missing, but connection to Colton property cannot be established beyond reasonable doubt. Recommend continued monitoring, but no charges at this time. The case went cold. The missing persons remained missing. The Coltons remained free. And in the VA hospital where Dale Colton had returned for his third admission, a night nurse found him in the chapel at 3 a.m., kneeling before an altar he didn't believe in, whispering the same 11 numbers over and over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. When the nurse asked what he was counting, Dale looked at her with eyes that held no present, only past, and said, "The ones who trusted the map." But it would take 23 more years and one brother's deathbed confession before those numbers would finally attach to names. And even then, the desert would keep most of its secrets. Dale Colton died on November 7, 1999, in a Reno hospice room that smelled of disinfectant and regret, and his final words were, coordinates 39 degrees, 17 minutes north, 116 degrees, 42 minutes west. 24 years after the killings, guilt finally extracted the truth that law enforcement never could, though even confession wouldn't return what the desert had swallowed. The hospice chaplain, Father Michael Corrigan, sat beside Dale's bed as liver failure completed what decades of bourbon had started. Dale's skin had turned the yellow of old newspaper, his breathing shallow and irregular, his remaining time measured in hours. He'd requested the chaplain not for absolution. Dale had stopped believing in forgiveness around 1976, but because he needed someone to hear what he'd been carrying. "There's a mine shaft," Dale whispered, his voice barely audible above the oxygen machine's hiss. 42 miles northeast of Tonopah. We put 6 of them there. The others went different places. I can tell you where. I can tell you all of it." Father Corrigan listened for 3 hours as Dale described the pool modifications, the valve system, the deliberate engineering of death disguised as geothermal accident. He described carrying bodies through darkness, the weight of a graduate student who'd trusted a hand-drawn map, the way a 19-year-old girl named Willow had felt lighter than she should have, as if death had already stolen substance before they moved her corpse. "We told ourselves they were trespassers," Dale said, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, seeing something beyond acoustic tile and fluorescent lights. "That they'd killed our calf. That they deserved what they got for not respecting property. But that's bullshit. We murdered them because we could, because we were angry and they were convenient, because Leonard had the idea and we were too fucking weak to say no." The chaplain called the FBI on November 8th, one day after Dale's death. Special Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, though the coincidence felt like cosmic poetry, reopened the case on November 12th. She was 32, young enough that the original 1975 investigation predated her birth, old enough to understand that cold cases rarely stayed cold without reason. The coordinates Dale provided led to an abandoned silver mine on BLM land, the entrance partially collapsed but navigable with proper equipment. On December 3rd, 1999, a forensic recovery team descended 120 feet into darkness and found what Dale's conscience had been guarding: 6 partially mummified bodies, preserved by the mine's dry air and consistent temperature. Dental records identified Marcus Chen, Sarah Dietrich, River Brennan, Michael Torres, Willow McCarthy, and Daniel Chen. They'd been in the mine for 24 years, 4 months, and 12 days. The other 5, Anna Chen, Jake Morrison, Derek Liu, Forrest Quinn, and Rain Patterson, were located over the following 8 months using Dale's detailed map of disposal sites: a dry well, a collapsed barn on abandoned ranch land, the bottom of Walker Lake during a drought that exposed what should have stayed hidden. The desert had kept them after all. Leonard Colton, now 73, was arrested on December 15, 1999. Raymond had died in 1987 from a heart attack, never having spoken about September 21st to anyone. Walter Colton, 96 and suffering from advanced dementia, was ruled incompetent to stand trial. He died in a care facility on March 2nd, 2000, while Leonard's preliminary hearings were still determining jurisdiction and charges. The trial began on August 14th, 2000, in Nye County District Court. Leonard pleaded not guilty, claiming Dale's confession was the fabrication of a guilt-ridden alcoholic seeking attention. Without Dale alive to testify, without forensic evidence directly linking Leonard to the bodies, 24 years had eliminated DNA, fingerprints, any biological connection the prosecution built its case on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of one person: Jeremy Finch, now 40 years old, still dreaming about taillights and screams. From the trial transcript, September 7th, 2000. Mr. Finch, you were 14 when you allegedly witnessed this incident. Can you explain why we should trust memories from a traumatized child over 24 years old? Because I've spent 24 years trying to forget them, Jeremy replied, and I can't. I can still see their faces. I can still hear them begging. I can still remember my father choosing to drive away. Trauma doesn't make memories unreliable. It makes them permanent. The jury deliberated for 6 days. They convicted Leonard Colton of 11 counts of second-degree murder on September 20th, 2025 years, and 1 day after the killings occurred. The judge sentenced him to 11 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Leonard, showing emotion for the first time during the trial, looked directly at the families of the victims present in the courtroom and said, "They shouldn't have cut my fence." No remorse, no apology, just property rights defended to their logical, monstrous conclusion. Leonard Colton died in Ely State Prison on June 12, 2009, from complications of pneumonia. His final words, according to the attending guard, were, "Tell them, the spring runs clean now." The Colton Ranch was seized by the state, and auctioned to satisfy wrongful death judgments totaling $14 million. A real estate developer from Las Vegas purchased it in 2010 with plans to build a luxury eco-resort featuring the natural hot spring as its centerpiece attraction. The project was abandoned after construction workers reported equipment malfunctions, unexplained illnesses, and the persistent smell of sulfur even when the spring wasn't running hot. Robert Finch never reconciled with his family. He died by suicide in 2004, leaving a note that said only, "I should have stopped the van." Linda Finch, who divorced him and remarried, attended Leonard Colton's trial every day, sitting in the front row, making eye contact with the man who'd engineered murder while her ex-husband had chosen complicity. The spring itself was filled with concrete by court order in 2011, sealed permanently. Though locals report that during full moons in September, steam still rises from cracks in the concrete, carrying the smell of minerals and something else, something that smells like fear, crystallized into vapor. Even dead springs remember. Today, the former Colton Ranch sits empty behind 8 strands of rusted barbed wire. Teenagers from Tonopah sometimes drive out there on dares, looking for ghosts or evidence or some explanation for how ordinary men committed extraordinary evil. They find only sagebrush, volcanic rock, and silence that feels deliberately maintained. But on still nights, when the wind drops and the desert holds its breath, some claim to hear it, the distant sound of water burbling over stone, the hiss of steam, and underneath it all, voices singing a folk song about rivers and freedom, the harmony incomplete. 11 voices trying to finish a song that September 21st, 1975, interrupted forever. The map that started it all was never found, though conspiracy theorists insist copies still circulate in certain back-to-the-land communities, marked with warnings in red ink. Paradise doesn't leave directions. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.